Georgia boys pulling out sideways. In the South we ball, how about them dogs? That's just how I was raised. Stuck in my Georgia ways. Don't care about what you say. That's just how I was raised.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into the podcast. It is your host, Holden. I'm glad to have you guys here tonight as we get geared up for another episode. We have made it to the end of basically college football season, with the exception to a few things that we've obviously got to mop up. We've got a whole college football playoff to mop up, which is like half a season by itself. So there's still a lot of football yet left to be played, even though we've made it to the end of the season. Regular season's over. Conference championship games are over. Bowl games are set. We've got all of this stuff to get through tonight. A lot to go through. I've kind of delayed coming back into doing this episode because obviously a lot happened in that football game Saturday night. But beyond that, we've had some questions that I've kind of been curious about and hoped that I would kind of get more answers to before coming on and getting this episode out to you guys. Still waiting to hear about a couple of those things, but we're going to at least run with some of the information that we've got and go off of it from there. Because again, a lot of stuff has happened and a lot of stuff is still yet to kind of be determined. Which we'll obviously be doing here over the next few days, possibly weeks. We've got a while. Huge football game Saturday night that turned out in the Dogs' favor. Obviously, Dogs winning that one 22-19 over Texas, winning the SEC championship game. Huge game in and of itself. But that's not where we're going to start. We're going to start with a couple of other things like we normally do. You guys know how we do it. If you've been here long enough, we're going to go through a little bit of the news and notes, get it into some of the injury updates that we saw coming into the game and what we saw coming out of it, because it was a big one. It was obviously a big game for that if you watched it Saturday. Recap this entire game, and then we have got a lot to talk about outside of this game as well, because again, college football playoff, all of this stuff is set, so we've got a lot going on. And if you can see back here behind me, I got this jersey a couple of months ago maybe, and little did I know that, hey, this jersey would come into play this week with the number 14 getting on the field and meaning a lot to Georgia. So pretty excited that I actually have that now, and have it just randomly hanging back here to kind of fill in the voids that were behind me, getting the Braves jerseys in here. But like I said, I've got a bunch of stuff around me, but you just can't really see it, and I don't really want to zoom out because I kind of need to clean some of it up. But anyways, that's kind of where we are with this. A big fun show, hopefully on tap for you guys. So if you're here, I would greatly appreciate if you guys would hit that thumbs up, like, subscribe, all of the things that you do, whether you're on YouTube, listening on podcast format. I appreciate you guys for being here. So let's jump right into it. The first and foremost part of this, obviously, like I said right there off the top, college football playoff rankings have been set. We could kind of run through the rankings, but I think I'm going to save it for a little bit because, again, we'll kind of harp more on that at the end because that's what we've got to look forward to. Georgia, obviously, we wondered, hey, coming into this game, if Georgia didn't win, would they be in the college football playoffs? Good thing is you don't have to worry about that because when you win the SEC championship game, we have that automatic bye being ranked where we were. So we don't have to worry about that. But there's a lot of other fun stuff to talk about with it, so we'll kind of save that here for just a little bit once we get past the recap. So if you guys want to hear about that, just stick around for a little while. Conference championship weekend happened all across the country, so there are a bunch of other games that we're going to kind of look at too. Really only a couple that really mattered because, like the Big Ten, for instance, Penn State and Oregon, great football game. Didn't matter because both of those teams are getting in one way or another. It was just determining seeding from that point, which we'll talk about that again here in just a little bit too because I was kind of pleased with that. And then a little bit on the transfer news coming in. We knew, I think, maybe that was it. Yeah, that's right, because we got London and we got Julian. It kind of confuses me. But anyways, we knew that he was already headed out, I think, before this game. I could be wrong. That might have been right after, but I'm fairly certain it was before we even got into this game that he was headed out. We've learned of a couple of other guys. Nitro Tuggle was one of those guys who said he was out, and now looking at it earlier today, it seemed like he says he's not leaving Georgia, which is a good thing. Don't know exactly what it is that happened there, but glad to have him on the team and hope that we can keep him on the team. Obviously, a very talented player, a young guy who has more experience to gain being in the University of Georgia, and I think he can help us out a lot as well. So glad to see him sticking around. I think Michael Jackson III might be also headed to the transfer portal. Listen, we talk about this every year. Now, this is just a talking point and a conversation that you have to have. guys are going to leave your football team. It doesn't matter if you win the national championship or not. Even in back-to-back national championship seasons, there were still guys who left the University of Georgia following that season. Probably the biggest thing for me is I wish a lot of this news and notes and noise would kind of be put on the back burner, at least until we get through that playoffs time. But I also somewhat understand it from a player's perspective, because if you have all these other teams who aren't playing in conference championship games, or they're not playing in a bowl game, or they're not playing in the playoffs or something like that, they're ready to go ahead and kind of start getting geared up for next year. And a lot of that happens in these bowl games, that if you're not playing in a college football playoff bowl game and you're just playing in just a regular old bowl game outside of that, you get those opt-outs, and then you start to kind of see, hey, what's the team for next year going to be? A la FSU versus Georgia last year, a game that we looked at and we said, that's not the FSU of last year. Well, it kind of looks like that's what the FSU of this year was going to be, based on the way that game ended up, and obviously the way that their season turned out this year. So I kind of understand it from that player's perspective. A little bit of a tongue twister putting those together. Because of that reason, you want to go ahead and get your name out there so that way you can be looked at by other teams and obviously be able to find that transfer location whenever that time comes. But I just wish it would kind of wait, especially with the college football playoff that's going on. You got enough going on in a team that the last thing that you really want or need is to kind of have to deal with, hey, I'm not only – we just had a signing class that we had to deal with coming into the SEC championship game. Now I have to not only continue to recruit other guys from that signing class and all, but I have to recruit the guys that are on my team so that way they don't transfer. And now some of these guys that are in the transfer portal that we're interested in, now I need to go recruit them. So there's so much going on. The timing of everything is very, very difficult. I don't know if I've ever said it, but I've said this. I know that I've said I'd love to be a fired college football coach, because like I said, probably after Nick Saban retired, I'd love to go coach the University of Alabama for 1 year and get fired and make a couple $1 million. No big deal to me. But I would not want to have to do this job seriously, like in a way that you truly sit down like Kirby does and have to recruit and do all the things that you have to do as a head coach. Could not and would not want to do that in the college football landscape this season and beyond, because I don't know where it's going. I know a lot of things have changed, but I'm not going to be the old man here that's going to sit back and say, oh, this needs to happen, or we need to go back to the old days or the old ways of things. I'm not going to do that. So we'll kind of move forward from it. But that's some of the news and notes that we have coming into it. Obviously, the injury list where we were looking at coming into this game, some of the guys that were in and out. Trevor Etienne was questionable. Played his heart out, got some information on that, which was cool. Branson Robinson did, I think, see the field. The only other two guys that were kind of on this list, with the exception to Joseph Ajonye, he was out. But Chauncey Bowens and as well as Kristen Miller, I don't think either of those saw the field. They were both questionable coming into this game. Obviously, there at the last play of the half, Carson Beck goes down. He's out for the rest of that game. And then Brett Thorson also there in the third quarter. Looks like he probably tore maybe an ACL. I haven't seen the finalization on that as far as that final verdict of what it is for him. But all we've seen is he'll be out for the rest of the season to have season-ending surgery on that knee, it looks like. So most of the time that seems like it's an ACL, MCL, something like that. Carson Beck, we're still looking to see. What do they call it? UCL? I can't remember. All these letters kind of run together because I'm not a doctor. That's all there is to it. But it looks like more than likely he's going to be out also, probably for this playoff. I could be wrong. I know he's going to do everything in his power to be able to play. But that doesn't mean that you can, when the time comes, if it either damages the potential of your draft stock moving forward, or if it hurts you further to where if you wanted to try to play for another season, that you couldn't by trying to come back so quickly that you aggravate or injure your arm further. Because a lot of the things that I've been reading and seeing from other people was this kind of an injury usually requires like a Tommy John surgery. Now, for a baseball player, that's a big deal. You're talking about possibly 18 months out. Obviously, the throw-in motion for college football is different than that of a baseball. Not terribly but different, but it is enough of a difference that it doesn't seem to be that same timetable. But I would be very surprised if we see Carson Beck back in a Georgia uniform this season, if at all. I mean, he truly could have played his last football game for the University of Georgia in that first half against Texas, this SEC championship game, which is kind of a bittersweet moment, I guess, to kind of look at and say, man, the years that we've gone through here over the last little while, to see that could be the end of it, and kind of feel like you went out on on a high note for sure by handing off the last play there of the game to be able to win it in overtime, but also feel like, hey, there was more that I feel like I could have left on the field. There's more that we feel like maybe we could have seen from him. And again, I don't know. I know that a lot of teams, a lot of players, especially with that COVID year and that COVID class, there was that potential to be able to take that red shirt one more year and have that fifth season. But also, I know, you have that medical red shirt that a lot of guys also take where they're able to have an extra year. And this may qualify for something like that, considering that COVID year. I don't know. And I know I've seen a lot of people on Twitter that say, hey, I'm ready to get rid of him. He needs to ride off into the sunset. And then I've seen the ones that have his back. And I can agree with those as well, because again, it just feels like he left a lot on the field, started the season kind of on a high note, and then we had some ebbs and flows, kind of have that throughout a season, but some parts of the season, not as pretty, and then other parts of the season, man, he looked great. Looked like that Heisman contender that we thought we were going to see at the very beginning of the season. Just didn't have it all together, all the pieces together for this season, and a lot of that has to do with, I think we're pretty young. A lot younger than I thought we were going to be offensively with some of the pieces. Obviously, you have a veteran line. You have some veterans that are on the outside, but it took a lot of young guys also stepping up in those positions, and it just takes a little bit of time to get those guys up and kind of in the program and buying in and built into what it is that you're putting on the field week in and week out. So don't really know the future of Carson Beck, but we'll keep an eye out on that. But again, I would be surprised if we see him moving forward in the college football playoffs based off of that injury. Because again, I don't see you coming back, and even if you do, I don't see that happening within the next 6 weeks. And I mean, we're playing in 3 weeks basically, and 3 weeks after that, the season's going to be over. The national championship will have happened by then. So I just don't know with the injury that he sustained that there is that possibility to even get back from it. And I hate it for him because obviously he put it all on the field on Saturday. He did everything that he could, and even to the point where he comes back there at the end of the game, like I said, to hand it off one last time to kind of ride off into the sunset, at least for this season, what it seems like. But we'll kind of keep an eye on that. Bigger things have happened. Surprises have come up in the season where, I mean, even when he came in to hand the ball off at the end, even that's all he was doing was handing off. It was still enough of a surprise to me to go, wait a minute, Carson Beck's back in here? What is happening? Because it seemed like he was out, and he stepped back on the field one more time, even though he wasn't throwing the ball. So bigger things have happened, and I'm not going to say it's a definite no, but it just seems that way. Obviously, we'll kind of keep you guys posted on that as we move forward. And to do that, one good way to kind of keep up with us on that, we're on Twitter, X. I'm probably always going to call it Twitter, at Dog Talk 20. Make sure you guys follow us there. That's a good way to kind of see any news and notes that we might be able to post or share on there. Instagram, Facebook, all of the things. You guys know how that is with the socials. But anyways, big game. Those are the guys who went down. Stinks really for Brett Thorson as well, again, because that third quarter, he's going to make a tackle on probably the longest punt return in his career for an opponent, because last year nobody returned any, and we've had a couple this year, but that was probably the biggest one of this season, and he went to make a tackle, and it was a non-contact injury, unfortunately for Brett. To possibly, again, I mean, he's out for the rest of the season as well, so that stinks. Hopefully, we'll get to see him back next year kicking the way he's been kicking all season, all year, all career here at the University of Georgia for us, because he's been very helpful, even teaching some of the defensive guys how to tackle some guys. But that's what we've got on it. Now let's kind of get into the recap of this SEC championship game. What I kind of want to do is I kind of want to run through some of the points and notes that I had for the preview of that and see kind of where we stood with a little bit of that. But then we're going to kind of dive into some of the higher points, at least somewhat statistically, because if you just look at the stats in this game and you don't look at the game actually on film or actually watch the game with your own eyes, this game, Georgia doesn't win the game if you're just looking at stats, because stats don't tell the story of this game. Some of them do. Some of them are kind of telling, but stats will not tell you the story of this game completely without actually having watched it. So that's kind of how we're going to break this thing down as we go through it. Let me take a little sip here and we'll get going. Obviously, this was Georgia's fourth straight SEC championship game. Had won one of the previous three. Now they get to go from that, 33.33% to now 50%. They've won two of the last four, which is nice to see. Georgia's 13th appearance in this. They were 4-7 before in the SEC, or it might have been game day. They made sure that they let you guys know that Georgia was probably has the worst record in the SEC championship game compared to all other members of the SEC, and they get to make that at least a little bit better looking now at 5-7 in their 13th appearance. Obviously, we talked about, hey, you got to win this and you get that first round bye. They do that. We're going to talk about the playoffs here in just a little bit more. Lose, more than likely, you face Indiana. Some things have kind of changed with that, which we also anticipated. So that'll be something else to look at. We talked about the win before and Trevor Etienne being a huge part of that with the 3 touchdowns. And yet again, coming into this game, he was questionable. Put the rock in his hands, and he made things happen once again against Texas in this football game. And he wasn't the MVP because another guy that we're going to talk about here in just a minute was. And rightfully so, it really could have gone to either of these guys because one was on defense that made plays that we needed, and one was on offense that made plays we needed. And funny enough, the two guys they had a lot of similarities in the first game that we played. Both of the guys that had some of the biggest plays in this game had the biggest plays in the first matchup. And, looking back, again, it's hard to beat a team twice in a year. And it took overtime to do that in the SEC championship game of this one. Georgia still reigning 2-0 over Texas this season. But for things to almost line up, not perfectly, obviously, but things to line up with the same players making some of the same big plays for the University of Georgia to be able to overcome this game and win that second time against a team was huge. And it's also, to me, somewhat unheard of to play that same situation and for it not to play out again 100% the same way, but for it to statistically kind of look and say, whoa, these guys did almost the same exact thing they did in the first game, minus a few things here and there. But Trevor Etienne, huge part of that. Glad we had him in this game, fighting again, had like a Kevlar vest on to be able to play because of that rib injury, but very glad to have him obviously on the field. We needed defense. They wreaked a lot of havoc on the first go-around, and we needed them to repeat it, and they did. I mean, in a huge way. Every time Georgia, especially late into this game, when Georgia would get a tackle for loss or when Georgia would get a sack, it's always kind of neat to see some of those comparisons, especially with a team that might have gotten sacked like 23 times on the season, and I think it might have been like 28 or maybe in the 30s. I could be wrong on that. But Georgia's got like 13 of those sacks against Texas alone. In their season where they've been sacked like 28 times, Georgia's got 13 of those, which is huge in 2 football games. But Georgia, they wreaked the same exact havoc that they did in that first time. And we're going to kind of dive into some of these stats and talk about that here in just a minute. But that was a big deal. Texas, 2.5-point favorite. Obviously didn't finish that way. And can't forget about Arch Manning. Pretty important part in this football game because I thought we would see a little bit more utilization of him, especially with the way that he played against Texas A&M in the week previous, coming into the SEC championship game with Texas and Texas A&M playing, and that didn't really happen. I was a little bit miffed, kind of surprised at the fact that didn't happen, and maybe Sark kind of – the only way I kind of look at this, I have 2 points on it, or 2 theories, so to speak, one of which I'm going to say is kind of like a conspiracy theory, and you'll understand why here in just a minute. I think some of it was – Sark probably knew, hey, if I'm putting Arch in right here, Kirby's probably already kind of prepared for this, and I don't know that it really gives us much of a benefit. Now, the one time they did use him, which I think was a 4th down, they lined up like 4th and 1, they line him up under center, and the ball gets snapped under his legs for an easy first down for the running back that's back behind him. And he was more of a decoy in that, but I don't know that we ever saw him again in this football game. I could be wrong, but I don't recall ever seeing him come back in this football game, which I thought was interesting. One, again, I think maybe Sark knew, hey, I don't know that this really benefits us a lot by putting him in this. Otherwise, I feel like you would have done that. If you just said, hey, I really think he could be the spark that we need in this football game, I think you do that. But I don't know that Sark necessarily felt that was going to happen in a Georgia defense who, even when they did that in that first matchup, he didn't make a difference in it. Matter of fact, he took a lot more of the licks too, just like Quinn had. With the exception that he had a few plays that he made with his legs, which made a little bit of a difference in their offensive production at the time, which was stalling. But Georgia still was able to affect Arch Manning to the point where he was also mute coming into the football game that first go-around. That didn't happen this time. So, to my conspiracy theory on this is, Sark knows he's in the college football playoffs. Win or lose this football game, I'm in the playoffs. Do I want to show every card I have? Because there is a part of you that goes, okay, this is an SEC championship game. I think it does matter to them. I think it matters to a lot of the coaches, players, teams in general in the SEC. But if I'm moving on to play for a college football playoff national championship, that matters just a little bit more because, again, I'm not saying to lose a game, but if you say I can kind of hold my cards a little bit closer to my chest because This game matters, but in the long run, it doesn't for a national championship, which is what we really want to win. Winning an SEC championship game, huge, means a lot. Winning a national championship game means even more. That's all there is to it. We've always said, hey, it just means more in the SEC. SEC championship game does, but a national championship game matters even more. So it does. My conspiracy theory, again, maybe he's holding the cards a little close to the chest there and trying to play a little bit more chess than he is checkers with some teams. So that way he doesn't have Arch on tape as much. I don't know film. I mean, age it right there. Why don't you about saying tape? But anyways, I don't know. I don't really know because I felt like we'd have seen a little bit more of him, and we just didn't see that. But we did defensively. We saw a lot in this football game from Georgia, which was great to see. Offensively, we kind of stalled in the first half. We're going to look at it here in just a second over some of these stats. We did get that burst of life, in my opinion, with Gunner coming in at the half. Which we're going to look into here in just a second. ETN, obviously, again, having the big day, and then Dalen Everett also having that on defense. This is kind of where we dive into some of the stats because, again, when I look at these things, especially when you break things down kind of by the quarter and you look at things, it's like, wait a minute now, Georgia did what? Georgia at the half had what? 54 yards compared to what? I think Texas had almost 300 yards at the time. And you look at that, again, I love doing that kind of comparison. If you were to tell me, hey, Georgia's got like 54 yards in the first half total and Texas has almost 300, what do you think the score is? And you probably wouldn't guess. To me, I'm thinking probably 14-3, maybe 21 to nothing, something like that, and it wasn't. It was 6-3, and a lot of that is because of some of the other things that we're going to talk about. Because again, defensively, Georgia showed up in this game. The first half, especially that first quarter, Texas possessed the ball a lot. I know I've kind of harped more and more the past couple of years on time of possession because some teams use it to their advantage in a really good way, and that's happened a lot against Georgia. Georgia kind of used that to their favor this season, or this game especially. And I do kind of want to look at that. But this first quarter was not that. This first quarter was Texas ball to be had. I think Georgia got the ball first. No. Texas actually got the ball first. Georgia gets an interception. Defensively, here we go. End up punting 3 and out pretty quick. Texas get the ball. They drive right down the field, and they kick a field goal. And then they get the ball back. And then I'm fairly sorry, we get the ball back, don't really do anything, give it back to them, and then pretty much drive right back down the field for Texas again, and they have to settle for another field goal. So really quickly there into the first 2 quarters, it's only 6-0, but it feels like at that point it probably could have been 14, if not 21-0. But Georgia's defense stood up, especially in the red zone. Red zone number is a big deal in this because at the beginning, third downs was very important for Texas, and they were getting those third downs. Later into the football game and for pretty much the rest of the football game, very far and few in between when it came to that third down statistic. So finals, as far as the finals, I like breaking it down more by the quarters because to me it's just kind of interesting to look at things as far as quarters go because I kind of like looking at things like that. Yeah, here we go. Here's how kind of the drives went in this by quarter. And it'll also give you a little bit of the time of possession and the way things worked. Again, we talked about it there off the beginning. Texas throws the interception. Georgia punts it. Texas goes and gets a field goal. Georgia punts it. And then Texas goes and kicks another field goal. Georgia gets back, kicks their field goal to make it 3-6. And then Texas attempts a field goal. They miss. And then we get a couple of punts back and forth. Georgia ends up fumbling it. That was right there at the half. Come out of the half. And this is where that spark, like I said, with Gunner Stockton came in. Again, obviously, unfortunate there for Carson in the situation. And this is one question I have because when I look at all the stats everywhere, I only see Georgia with 1 interception. Now, in this sequence of things, which I guess this kind of makes sense now that I think about it, there was a sequence right there before the half where it seemed like there was a false start on Texas. We throw it deep. They intercept it. Doesn't count because they were offsides. False start, offsides. And then it seemed like maybe that happened again. I can't remember exactly. But then it was a fumble there at the end when he threw it. For whatever reason, I was thinking it was an interception that they returned for a long way. But now it kind of dawns on me as I talk it out. But we knew kind of going into halftime, it was like, yeah, there might not be Carson Beck after this. This was a rough hit, and, man, it just didn't really look good. And then pretty much coming out of the half, it was, hey, it's Gunner Stockton's show, and it's time to see what he's going to do. And I know a lot of us were kind of like, well, what does that mean? You know, I mean, is he going to be ready for this? You know, we haven't really seen Gunner Stockton a lot at all this season, really coming in. Couple of mop-up duties, but there hadn't been a lot of mop-up duties in a schedule that Georgia has played this season that doesn't really allow for that if you're not really getting a lead that you want, especially in a quarterback who at times have been struggling in Carson Beck, who we needed to be on the field, getting more and more reps, getting more and more, especially with these wideouts that are having trouble in confidence and catching the ball. We needed that continuity to kind of be built throughout the season. So having your starting quarterback on the field was pretty much imminent to have that happen and start to really build more and more with these guys. And we didn't see a lot of Gunnar in this season because of that. Now, when he came in, the good news is we've heard it from players, we've heard it from coaches, that everybody was and is completely confident in Gunnar Stockton as long as he is confident. He has to be confident in himself, but he has to understand, hey, these players, this team, these coaches, they have my back. And even the fan base, you could hear it throughout the stadium start to build as he came onto the field. Hey, they've got my back. And what does Georgia do? Pew! What is it, like 75-yard drive down the field? Boom, touchdown. First touchdown of the game comes by way of Georgia with a backup quarterback where they drive right down the field and just absolutely dominate Texas on that drive. And boom, not only does Georgia score, but Georgia has the first lead of this football game, also making it 10-6 at that time. And that was a huge spark, not only for an offense that needed it, who had kind of been lacking there in the first half, but for an offense who had just kind of been struggling a good bit through the half. I wanted to kind of see if I could pull up. I've got my final stats here, which is a good number to kind of have, but I wanted to look real quick. Sorry to rustle through these papers while I'm doing this. I've got it organized, but there's a difference in organization and being able to get to what I want to get to quickly, which I don't have. So let's look at it here by a couple of quarters. The first quarter alone, like we talked about, I'm going to bring us basically to the halftime. First quarter alone, Georgia had 1 first down the entire time to Texas's 6. We had rushed the ball for -6 yards. We had passed it for 15 yards. So total, we had 9 yards in the first quarter, whereas they had 170 in the first quarter, 149 of which came through the air for them. They were throwing it down the field pretty easily. They also had the ball for 10.5 minutes, where Georgia only had it for 4.5 minutes. Huge difference. Again, this is going to shift later in the football game, but that first quarter was Texas to be had. And again, if you look at it that way, Georgia's got 9 yards. Texas has 170. I'm thinking it might be 14-0 at this point, with some turnovers, but the turnovers actually weren't happening by way of Georgia. They were happening by way of Texas, not Georgia, off of that very first possession in their third down conversions. 0 for 2 for Georgia, not good, and then 3 for 5 for Texas. So it was pretty imminent that Texas was going to be able to drive down the field pretty quickly there in the first quarter. Then we get to the second quarter, and this is just the second quarter alone. Again, Georgia at this point in time has 45 yards on the board, gets that 1 field goal. Texas also gets another field goal. But Texas in the second quarter has racked up 90 yards. Again, 79 of that's coming through the air, 41 of which was coming through the air for Georgia, only 4 yards on the ground. So when you're looking at this first half statistic alone, Georgia has -2 rushing yards in the first half. And there was a point in this football game where I tweeted out, I was like, guys, please just run the ball more. That's all we want to do, just run the ball some more. And I know that when I say something like that, it's like, most ball knowers, as everybody likes to say, it's like you know that you have to continue to run the football, because if you become one-dimensional, especially in this kind of a game, and all you're doing is throwing the ball, it's pretty easy to defend that. So I understand that you still have to kind of lean on that, but it was something that was not working at all. We could not get any kind of a push. Some of it was because we were trying to drive up the middle, but it just wasn't happening. And there was a point where I was just frustrated, where I was like, man, we got to quit. We've got to find guys open downfield. Credit out to Texas's defense in a couple of spots where they did really good of covering our guys. But, man, this first half was abysmal to watch. That's all there is to it. I don't have another word for it, because there have been a couple of these games this season that I've watched this offense, and it just lacks creativity. It lacks any kind of drive. It lacks any kind of motivation to make me look and go, this team can win a national championship, because there just didn't seem to be that. There didn't seem to be spark. There didn't seem to be life in an offense that maybe this is just the offense that we had this year, the cards that we were dealt where, hey, it's not going to look pretty at first, but we're working. We're working on leaning on these guys on the offensive line. We're working on wearing the guys down by doing these run plays. We're working on doing all of these things to try to prepare ourselves later in the game to where some of these things break our way. We're setting things up to where they break our way. Case in point on one of these things that I did notice. I have not really noticed Georgia, and I could be wrong about this. Georgia's probably been doing it all season, and I haven't seen it. But I haven't really seen that much of a shift. When we're in a punt situation, a lot of shifting that we're doing with one of our guys, and I think it's Malachi. I could be wrong, but we were having a lot of shifting going on with one of our guys, and I kept watching that. And by the third or fourth time we had done it, I was watching going, I think we're setting something up here. I'm not saying that I called what happened later in the game, because I'm not saying that at all, because I had no idea that was going to happen. But it did make me wonder, hey, if you do that enough and they bite at it enough, it did make me wonder, hey, is that just setting something up for potentially being able to do something in the future on that fourth down? And it happened. Again, I didn't call that. I didn't say, I called a dude. But I did wonder, what is up with that? But I think that's something that we just have to kind of maybe understand this season is, we might not look very pretty at the beginning, but we're working. We're working for something future, as I stutter my way through that, down the line where it might not be the first quarter, second quarter. It's more likely going to be the second half, which we've done all season long. We know that. We are a second half football team this year for sure. But that's the only thing I can say about that, because the first half of a lot of football games this year, but especially this one, to come out and have 56 total yards to 228 Texas. Excuse me, I actually have that wrong. 54 to their 260 to that tune. And again, for it to be 6-3, you can do nothing but credit your defense, because your defense is what kept you in this football game a lot. When they got to the red zone, they struggled. They struggled a lot. By the end of this football game, we're going to look at that number and you're going to understand what I'm talking about, why they had a lot of yardage. And this first half statistically is what you cannot look at stats and say, this is how this game should have played out. Texas should have, based on stats, based on just looking at the paperwork, seeing what the yardage is in this football game. You cannot take this first half and think that's the end of the ball game right there, because again, 260 yards for Texas, 54 for Georgia. At this point, Georgia only has the Georgia has the fumble by this point, which was Carson Beck's fumble right there at the half. They have the interception. But at this point, let's see, third downs, Georgia's 1 for 5. Can't be that way. They're 4 for 10, which is starting to show a little bit of what's going to happen on third down as we continue. They started getting stopped again. A lot of that was happening in the red zone, and they do get the one fourth down, which they converted. That's where I think they had that conversion with Arch Manning, where they did bring him in the one time, the snap between the legs, keep the drive alive, and they still only got a field goal out of that. So again, credit out to your defense for that, because it was huge. But that's where we look at the half, where things are just, it's looking rough. I don't know if Georgia's going to be able to come out of this. And then again, boom, we start right there off that third quarter. The spark that you needed, the life that you needed to give that offense. It's like the crowd came alive, the offense came alive, the whole team really came alive right there in the third quarter. Even though you were without your starting quarterback, your key starting quarterback, you're without him. And there was still enough of a spark on this team to say, hey, we're going to fight. Not only for you, obviously for the guy who went down, but we're going to fight for this team all in general. And we're going to make something happen here. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful to see the drive that we had right there after the half. Obviously, when he came back onto the field, Gunner still had some moments that you looked at and you go, okay, there's definitely a learning curve that we've got to get here. And he's going to have to do it really quickly, especially in this football game, because you're going against the best defense in the country at that point in time, and what we still believe could possibly still be one of the best defenses in the country this season. You're against that, and you haven't had to go against anybody with UMass, and maybe, I don't even think it was against Tech. I can't remember. Tennessee Tech, maybe? You haven't really had to play in games that are anywhere to the caliber of this football game that you're coming up against Texas in this big of a stage. And he did it flawlessly. Again, when he came in it a couple times, this would be my only critique on it. And a lot of this, again, it's just experience. He hadn't really played meaningful football in a couple of years. But it's when you see those screen passes that Bobo is known for to a wide out, a little bubble screen or something. You know, Carson gets it, boom, and the ball's out really quickly to the sideline. Let your guy make the play. When Gunner would have that happen, it was snap, step, rear back, throw. A lot slower. One thing, the only critique I would have, definitely got to speed that up, because defenses, if I can see it, defenses are definitely going to see that and say, I'm coming. I'm biting for that anytime that we see him turn that way. I'm running as hard as I can to see if I can't pick this off. Probably a pick six. Definitely something that he'll have to speed up. I don't need to tell him that, because I think they know all that ahead of time. Again, a lot going on in this football game as he gets brought into it. Third quarter, this is how we look just third quarter alone. Here's where the time of possession starts to flip, because again, in this half, we talked about some of our numbers right there. 4:30 is how long Georgia had the ball that first quarter. 10:30 for Texas. 5:19 is how long Georgia had it there in the second quarter. And 9:41 is how long Texas had it. When I look at the cumulative, looking at everything for that time of possession, 20 minutes and 11 seconds is how long Texas has had the ball compared to Georgia's 9 minutes and 40 seconds. They had the ball twice as long as us in this football game. And again, based on the yardage, based on all of that, when you look at, again, statistics, this should be a blowout right here, and it's 6-3. It's a one-possession football game. So much so when we come out of the half, Georgia shows you that by going right down the field and taking the lead with the very first drive out of the half. Georgia, in the third quarter alone, scores 10 points to Georgia 0, Texas, 0. Gets those first downs, throws the ball for 73 yards, runs the ball for 43 yards, we actually ran the ball for 73 and threw it for 43 yards. 116 yards is the complete flip to the script coming out here in the second half, making those adjustments. 116 yards for Georgia to 16 Texas yards. Time of possession, huge in this one. Georgia had it 11 minutes and 24 seconds. They only had it 3:36. 2 for 5 on third downs for Georgia, completely changing around. 1 for 1 on fourth downs, and then 0 for 2 for Texas. And they only had the ball for 3:36 again in this third quarter. Huge quarter for Georgia. Momentum shift, really giving the ball in the drive Georgia's way. And they needed that in a big way. In this quarter alone, Gunnar Stockton, 4 for 6, 27 yards, 18 was his long. ETN gained most of his yardage for this game in this third quarter alone because, again, coming into the half, Georgia's -6 yards, I believe it was there, before this third quarter. And in the third quarter alone, he rushes for 66 yards and a touchdown. So, huge part of it right there, huge part of this football game. Then we get to the fourth quarter and beyond. Let's see. By this point, again, it's 13-6. And then you get your totals. Georgia has almost caught up with the time of possession just in one quarter. One quarter right there gets really close all of a sudden. Then we get to the fourth quarter. Here's where things get fun again. Texas then turns around and scores 10. And Georgia does kick the one field goal in there as well, obviously, to make that a tie game. And this is where things started to kind of even out a little bit better. Georgia, 56 yards on the ground, 26 through the air. They rushed at 3 yards on the ground and 100 yards through the air to make it 82-103 as far as the total yardage, going in Texas's favor. But things got a little bit more even, except for the time of possession. Again, that was in Georgia's favor. 10:46. You had a couple of marches, especially in that third quarter. There was like a 8-9 minute drive, it seemed like, maybe even the full 10.5 or however long that quarter was. But Georgia had the football a long time in the third quarter and a long time in the fourth quarter. You kind of had that Kirby death march where it was like, we got the ball, march it down the field. Just get yards, score, do what you have to do in this football game. And Georgia did a pretty good job about that. Obviously got one more interception on that. They also got an interception in that fourth quarter late, which was a little bit nerve-wracking. Could have possibly been a pick six, but this could have been the turning point of this football game too. And one of the keys of this game was points off of turnovers, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Third downs, both of us were 1 for 4. Both of us 1 for 1 on fourth downs. I believe this is where Georgia goes for it on fourth down in a punt situation, ran that little fake where Drew Bobo gets a 1 for 1 passing yards. He's 100% on the season for 9 yards, getting the first down to Arian Smith. I want to talk about that here in just a second too, if I can remember it. Penalties was a big deal for Georgia in this one. I had a couple of them on it, but a big quarter nonetheless for Georgia. When you got to that fourth quarter, again, Gunnar kind of has to clean a few things up there because, again, that's a pick six. That's potentially the football game. But one of the stats that I made sure I wrote down in this was sacks is a big deal, tackles for loss, thirds, time of possession, but points off of turnovers. Georgia had 2 turnovers, 1 interception, 1 fumble. Texas had 3 turnovers, 1 fumble, 2 interceptions. Out of that, Texas only got a field goal. Out of all the turnovers that Georgia had, they only got a field goal. Georgia only got a touchdown out of theirs with the 3, but there was still only a field goal that they gained from us based off of those turnovers. That's a big stat. That's a big stat when it comes to you're getting the ball. This luckily wasn't a short side of the field. It seems like we were pretty deep in their territory at the point in time when that interception happens. which is beneficial. It's a good thing we didn't give them short side of the field. And another reason they had to kind of drive down the field to kick a field goal and make it that way, because that could have been bad. It could have been a pretty bad situation there for Georgia at the time, where it looked like, hey, you got the ball, you're driving, you're eating the clock, you got the lead, the wind's right here in the bag, and then the interception happens, and that obviously gets pretty tough. But then you get to that fourth quarter, they drive down, make the plays they need to tie things up. Georgia couldn't quite hold on to that lead, but nonetheless, hey, we're going to take this thing to overtime. Great football game so far. They get the ball first in the half, or coming into overtime at that point in time. End up having to kick the field goal again. The defense stands up in a good way, and then Georgia gets on the field and run it a couple of times, and then Gunnar Stockton puts his head down. I mean, he gets absolutely ran over. That's all there is to it. Can't say it any other way. I mean, just got his clock cleaned. So much so the helmet comes off, no targeting. He might have been asleep for a few seconds in that play. But then the unthinkable happens when Carson Beck comes running on the field with his arm just hanging there like a limp noodle and hands the ball off to ETN for one of the greatest plays in Georgia football history. It's going to go down as that, as a SEC champion, winning game play right there. Handing it off. That's all he had to do. And ETN, it was kind of fun hearing some of his interview afterwards saying, hey, man, this was the greatest handoff I've had all season of my career, because ETN came here to play for championships, and he got to play for a championship on Saturday, and he got to win a championship on Saturday with the University of Georgia. Appreciative for him. Glad to see him, and glad to see what he was able to do in this football game. Not to take away from, again, a lot of what our defense did in this football game, too, because Dalen Everett, he was a big one. He was a big one in this one. Has a couple of interceptions. He had a one or two, I think, even in the first matchup, and then obviously had the sack, and then I think even the forced fumble was credited to him in that first matchup where he pops Ewers in the back. That was a big deal, and he was a big deal in this one as well. We had a lot of guys that had tackled for losses. We had a lot of sacks in this football game. A lot of big things happening. I want to kind of talk about here for just a second, now that I kind of remember what I was going through, was Arian Smith. You know, we talk about offensively. Drops has been a big thing this season. He had a couple in this game as well. But I noticed there was a little bit of a difference, and Kirk pointed this out. I didn't notice this, but Kirk pointed out, hey, he's jumping for no reason, and he's dropping the ball a lot of times when he does that, if not a lot of times, every time. And I noticed something different about when Carson was throwing it to him. Maybe there was some hesitation in it, not as much zip on the ball, and Aaron just wasn't catching it. But when Gunnar came in, the thing I noticed was Gunnar's throwing at 146 miles an hour, and you have no choice but either catch it or die, because the football is going to take your head off. And he caught the ball. Evidently, that's what he needed, just somebody who's going to throw it so hard you ain't got a choice but to catch it. And he did that. So, I don't know. Maybe that's something moving forward to think about and see and say, hey, you just got to throw it really hard to this guy, and he'll catch it. But if you don't, if you lob it to him, it's just not going to happen. I don't know. But I did think that was kind of interesting. And a good point that Kirk also pointed out, the fact that, hey, he's jumping, and that could be a big problem for the reason that he's not catching these footballs. He's trying to bring the ball into his body a lot more, which I know that can be troublesome, obviously bouncing off your chest plate or what have you. But interesting. An interesting thing that I did notice. Getting to the thirds and fourth downs, these were important in this game. Again, Georgia 5 for 15, not very efficient on third downs. Efficient on fourth down, both teams were. We were both 2 for 2 on fourth downs. They were 6 for 18 on third downs. Third downs, again, they did matter. We talked about the points off of turnovers. Sacks and tackles for loss. Georgia had another, again, elite day on defense. 6 sacks for 27 yards, 15 tackles for losses for 49-yard loss in this game. Texas had 3 sacks for 33, and they had 10 tackles for loss for 53 yards. So both defenses were playing great in this game. Georgia's defense lined up elitely again in this football game to be able to keep Georgia's offense in this football game for something that was really lacking in the first half. And you got to have that. You got to have that where you're complementary on both sides of the ball. When your offense is struggling, your defense has to keep you in football games. And Georgia's defense has done that time and time again this season, but we really needed it in this game, and that was big. Here's one of the biggest stats of the game as well. We talked about the red zone a little bit, but here's where it lines up. Georgia was 3 for 3 in the red zone. 3 for 3. Got the 1 touchdown, the 2 field goals. Important. Texas, on the other hand, only got in the red zone twice. So it's not like they were in the red zone over and over again. It's just that they drove the ball very efficiently, especially in that first half. But they only got in the red zone twice. They got 1 field goal out of it. 1. Their field goals, this is how it went. Georgia kicked 3 field goals in this game. 3. They were 3 for 3. Peyton Woodring, Do your thing, dude. By the way, interesting stat here. Trevor Etienne, Peyton Woodring, the only two people to score for the University of Georgia, both matchups against Texas. All 52 points that Georgia scored between 22 in the first and 30 in the, or 22 in this matchup and 30 in the first matchup, all came by way of Peyton Woodring and Trevor Etienne. Peyton Woodring kicking the extra points and obviously the field goals, and then Trevor Etienne scoring the rushing touchdowns, because that's all we've done. Very interesting stat. But back to this game. Texas, on the other hand, goes 4 for 6 kicking field goals and pretty much made the difference in this game. Missing a couple of field goals in this one was huge for Bert Auburn and Texas. And not going to say that it cost him the game, because it's hard for me to ever look at a game and go, hey, if he makes it, I don't know, then you got to kick off and things are just different. The field position is not the same. The momentum doesn't swing and shift quite the same when a guy does make a kick. I did think it was kind of interesting. The ice actually worked. You know, a lot of times guys get iced and it doesn't really matter. But I've noticed more and more now when you try to ice a guy, they usually get a kickoff ahead of time and you kind of get to see, okay, dang, I kind of wish we didn't call the timeout, or, man, I'm glad we called that. Because the first kick they make, he kicks while we call the timeout, he made it. Looked good. I was like, all right, well, there's that. And then he comes back afterwards, misses it. So kind of worked on in our favor there. Thought that was pretty interesting as well. Again, just a great football game. I was very excited to see what would happen in this game. I was very curious to see what would happen in this game as well, because it's just a huge football game. I didn't know exactly how things were going to end up in this football game. I didn't have much of a prediction on it. Kind of coming into it in my head, at least, I was thinking 24-17. Probably felt pretty good. I felt like Georgia could kind of do that. Again, didn't really know what offensively things were going to look like, because, again, they struggled a lot in that first half, but kind of turned things around in the second half. Here's where your final stats end up looking like. We rushed the ball 141 yards on 37 rushes, 2 touchdowns, both of which Trevor Etienne. That one in the obviously at the end of the game in the overtime was that second one. 31 yards for Texas is all they rushed for. Again, Georgia's defense, and a team who ran all over Texas A&M the week before was Texas. Georgia prides themselves on not really letting you run the ball. Now, we kind of talked about some of those stats coming into it where you have been able to run a little bit more efficiently on Georgia, but what Texas is known for, and what I kind of noticed in that Texas A&M game, was they're running up the gut a lot, and they're successful at that against those teams. You can't do that to Georgia. If you're going to run on Georgia, you got to get the edge, because that's where we kind of have some contain, where we struggle. We struggle a little bit more when you get wide on us, because we kind of lose that contain, especially with a running quarterback. And that's, again, why I wondered why we wouldn't see Arch as much. Not hating on it, because, hey, you win the football game. But I do think that would have been a little bit more effective to it. But, again, my conspiracy theory, just kind of go back to that. I wonder. We're going to see. You could see him playing a lot more in some of these other games, and that would kind of be the tell to me that says, okay, maybe they were kind of holding that back. But that's it. Rushing side, on the passing side of things, Georgia was 136, 20 for 30, 1 interception, no touchdowns. They were 358, 27 for 46, 2 interceptions, and the 1 touchdown. I'm fairly certain, I had the number in front of me, but Brock. Gunnar Stockton had a great night. 12 for 16, the 1 interception, obviously 71 yards. Did get sacked twice. Carson Beck, before he went out at half, was 7 for 13, 56 yards. And then again, Drew Bobo, 1 for 1, 9 yards on that little swing pass to Arian Smith. Arian Smith was your leading receiver, 5 touches, 41 yards. Trevor Etienne, 5 touches, 28. Oscar Delp, 3 touches, 23. Hello, Lawson Lucky. The 1 catch he had was a huge one, because he catches it, barely gets his toe down, gets us the first down. Important in this football game. Again, we talked about Dalen Everett was huge in this one. Some of the defensive guys, I wanted to kind of give them some of their kudos as well. Yeah, because this was huge. Malachi Starks, 7 solo tackles, 8 of which were total, C.J. Allen had 7 total in this one. Smile Munden, 6 tackles. K.J. Bolden, 5. Then we get to some of the other big ones. Dan Jackson had 4, 1 huge hit. Warren Brinson had 4, 1 sack, lost for 3 yards. Jalen Walker, 3 tackles, 1 of which was a sack. Michael Williams, 3 tackles, 2 of which were sacks. And then you had, Chaz Chambliss, 2 tackles, 1 of which was a sack. Trying to think some of these other guys. I mean, you had all of these sacks, but then you also get tackles for loss in there as well. So big day for the defense as well, lining up, playing in this one. And it was, again, just a fun game to watch at the time when you get to the first half again, some frustration by just looking and saying, why are we running the ball 7,412 times when we are in the negative at yardage, and still we're in the negative by the time we got to the half? Adjustments were made. Things looked a lot better in the second half. Gunnar Stockton brought a little bit of life to this team. I'm interested to see how that looks going forward because, again, I don't think we're going to get Carson Beck. But you now get 3 weeks to prepare Gunnar Stockton for, hey, you're the guy. One big thing that has hurt Georgia has been a running quarterback. One big thing that has helped Georgia has been a running quarterback, a la Stetson Bennett a couple of years ago. Won you a couple of national championships. Can't forget that. And I really think that there's the potential that he actually lines up and does this and helps us in that same kind of way. Am I saying he's the next Stetson Bennett? No. I did tweet it out, hey, is this Stetson Bennett 2.0? I understand that it's not, somewhat of a joke, but hey, could be. Be interesting to kind of see, and I think we're going to get that opportunity to see that. But you got a few weeks to really amp up his practice progression, obviously. I don't doubt that here over the next few weeks, especially if they know, hey, you're the guy, you got to get ready for this, that he's probably going to do everything he can as well to be watching film, everything he can to be on the field, even extra outside of just normal practices to get ready, speed to his game up because this game is a lot faster than what it was he was playing on Saturday. It worked for us Saturday, but you got a lot of work to do to prepare for some of these other big games that are going around. Again, Dogs on top of this one, 22 to 19. Such a beautiful thing to see. Dogs, again, SEC champions for the second time in the last 4 meetings that they have gone to this game. Obviously, covering that spread pretty easily, which was Texas's favorite 2.5. Georgia wins that one. Like to see that. So that was a big one. Some of the other games that are going on around the country, again, we'll kind of wrap up with that as far as the recap of the SEC championship game. Go Dogs to that for sure. Glad to see it. Then we kind of look at some of the other games that went on Penn State and Oregon. Oregon kind of let Penn State stick around in this one. Really good football game. I was impressed with how much Penn State actually stuck around in it. Obviously, in the end, Oregon does end up winning that football game. Then you got the ACC matchup, which was the second most important game to me in the college football playoff scheme and what was to come at least because you had the SEC championship game, which more than likely both teams are in, but it's still a great game to watch. But then you had the ACC championship game, which matters because at the time, this is what we wondered. This was the fuss that I had, which we're going to kind of dive in as we start to talk about some of the college football playoff rankings here, was that ACC championship game has a lot of implication. And then you also had the Big 12 between Iowa State and Arizona State. A lot of implications because it's win or go home in that one. Whoever wins it, you're in. You lose it, you're out. Now, we didn't know exactly how it was going to line up as far as the ranking truly went because if Clemson wins, obviously the ACC, they're ranked a lot lower than Iowa State, or Arizona State. So that would actually give Arizona State or Iowa State the head up, getting that true bye into that first week. And that's exactly what happened. Arizona State absolutely steamrolled Iowa State to get that position. Boise, they handled their business on Friday night to be able to get that position also to have that bye there. I'll look at their ranking here in just a minute. But then it came down to Georgia. Georgia handled their business. They're in, no doubt about it. Obviously, you didn't have to worry about Texas not being in because they were ranked second. Didn't really worry about Georgia not being in unless there was just an absolute blowout in that SEC championship game. Then, obviously, the committee kind of has to look at that and go, I don't know. Georgia hadn't been playing the greatest all season. They beat this team once, but they lost to them. But at least we don't have to really worry about that now. But then you get to the ACC. The fight that I had even before this was, hey, if SMU loses this football game, you can't punish a team who at that point in time is going to be 11-2 for playing in their conference championship game and losing it, barring that they get absolutely smacked by Clemson. Because if Clemson loses, they're out. They're ranked 20th or 15th, whatever it was at the time. They're not getting in, especially if they lose this football game. And Clemson, lo and behold, did win it. And at one point in time, they were absolutely smacking SMU. So there was a point I looked and it was like a 17-point difference, and I was like, wow. Clemson just ran away with this, and SMU is out. And then all of a sudden, SMU came right back into that football game, and right there nearing the end, they tied up. And then what happens? Clemson drives it right down the field really quickly. Not really drives it, but gets at least close to field goal range, and they end up kicking a game-winning field goal there at the end of the ACC championship game to win it. And by that, I was looking, going, okay, SMU's a fighter. SMU's a team that can actually do this. And Clemson's now in. They don't get the automatic bye. They get that 12 seed, so they still have to play in the first round. But they're at least in. But I was like, man, you can't let SMU be out because they lost that. And that's what it came down to. It came down to the exact thing that I was wondering if it would between SMU and Alabama. They gave it to SMU. And I'm glad they did. Not because it's Alabama. That's got part to do with it, sure. But to me, all I've seen is the griping about the team that's won, the team that has these wins. Let's see their wins. Look at their wins. All these wins are so big. Alabama's beat Georgia. Alabama beat this team here. They beat that team over there. SMU hadn't beat anybody in the top 25. They hadn't done anything. And then I look and I go, SMU couldn't help their schedule. Their schedule is what it was. Some of the teams that they might have been playing, I don't know this for a fact, but they could have been ranked earlier in the season. It's not their fault they're not good. Just like if Ohio State looked at their schedule ahead of time, they said, okay, we got Penn State, we got Oregon, those are great. We got Michigan. They just won the national championship. That's going to be a great win if we can get it. By the way, they didn't get it. But Michigan, nobody knew that Michigan was all of a sudden going to fall off. We kind of had an idea when Jim Harbaugh left. But anyways, I digress. You didn't know that some of these teams that you're going to play all of a sudden would just fall off and not be what they were. I mean, FSU came into this season ranked in the top 10, and they won 2 football games all season. I hate to keep harping on them, but SMU couldn't help the schedule that they were dealt, but they played the schedule that they were dealt. They lost 1 football game all of that season before losing the second one in the ACC championship game. I get it. They hadn't beat a top 25 team. There wasn't a top 25 team on their schedule to beat, unfortunately. Alabama, you have beat top 25 teams. I get that, understand, especially, hey, it's Georgia. You beat us. Fair and square. That's all there is to it. At one point in time, you were kicking our tail. Came back, made it a game. Anyway, we know what that was. But we like to look at those wins, whereas we fail to look at those losses. SMU faced a loss before getting into this ACC championship game. They lose to the team who won the ACC championship game by a last-minute field goal. Alabama, you lost to Vanderbilt, who, what are they, 7-5 by the end of the season? They just do get in the bowl ranks. Then you lost to a Oklahoma team who's not good. Oklahoma's not a good football team this year. That's all there is to it. I don't care if they finish 6-6 and they're bowling or not. Not that really good of a football team. And by the way, you lost it bad, really bad. And you didn't score a touchdown at all in that game. And that was one where I looked at, it's one thing if that's week 2, week 3, maybe even week 4, where it's like that's early in the season. We had a lot of stuff to figure out. We had some guys hurt. We weren't quite, that happened, that was week 11, right before playing Auburn in your last game of the season. It's not like that happened 3 months ago. It's not like that happened back in October when Georgia played Texas. That happened just a couple of weeks ago. That's really recent. And a lot of teams now are being judged on, this is what you look like at the end of the season, because by the time you get to the end of the season, this is the team basically that you are. The hard part that I look at that, and I'll give this credit to every team, not just Georgia, is, man, it's a tough schedule, especially Georgia's schedule this year. There's a reason they had the number 1 strength of schedule by the end of this season. Florida right there behind them, I'm fairly certain, in a second, because they had a brutal schedule as well. But, man, when you play that hard of a schedule, by the time you get to the end of the season, because the last bye Georgia had was right there at Halloween before that Florida game, where they're playing all these games straight. I don't remember what it is. I don't have the schedule right in front of me, but that's like 6 or 7 games straight that you had to play from that point on. And by the way, you're not getting a break before you play in the SEC championship game. So I get it. By the time you get to the end of the season, hey, you're beat up, you're hurt. We know all about that. You got guys that are trying to get back but can't quite get back yet. They're not able to get healthy. And you're just fatigued mentally, physically, all of the which, to where when you get to that end of the season, it does become kind of tough. But you have to find a way to win and a way to keep going, regardless of what's happening with your team. And Georgia has done that week in and week out, even against this schedule that was as difficult as it was. Georgia's done it. They've continued to win even when sometimes they get down. Now, yeah, they lost to Alabama earlier in the season. They lost to an Ole Miss team who's not a bad football team. Shouldn't have lost that football game, but they did. Georgia wasn't ready. Georgia didn't come prepared for that game, and I bar some of that up to the scheduling. But at the same time, you got to win them. You got to find a way to win them. I hate that we lost that football game, which we didn't. Luckily, we took care of business from that point forward to get to where we are now, getting into this college football playoff. But that was probably my biggest gripe coming into it is, hey, we got to figure out what's the deal here. How's this going to work out if you have a team who, in my opinion, doesn't deserve to be here, and now all of a sudden you're going to give a team that just played in a conference championship game the shaft because they played in a conference championship game, and they only lost by a field goal at the buzzer. But I digress. It's all set now. That's what we're going to dive into. So let's look at it. College football playoff. My handy dandy notes are here, and I'm going to go through them here. I had a bracket here. Oh, yeah, I wanted to look at the bracket. Let's throw all that on the ground. I wanted to look at the bracket that they were considering ahead of this, because I have that too, even though it's in black and white. Apparently my printer is not a color printer. But anyways, this is what they thought things were going to match up like before we started this football game, which being the SEC Championship game. Before conference weekend, they thought it would be, all right, here we go. Oregon 1 with the bye. That happened. Boise State, number 4 with the bye. That happened. A little bit different ranking. Texas, 2 with the bye. That obviously didn't happen. SMU, 3 with the bye. That obviously didn't happen. But then they thought it'd be Tennessee and Ohio State. Would have been a good matchup. Still pretty close. That's still happening. That's 9-8. Nothing changed there. Then they had Penn State and Arizona State. Changes slightly. That 5th ranking is what they said was going to be the best one to be in. That's where Texas ends up. Penn State actually ends up being 6th. Ranked there after Texas falls to Georgia. Then they had obviously 7 and 10 being Georgia and Indiana. Indiana is that 10 spot, but Notre Dame would end up being that 7 spot based on Georgia's win over Texas, having to kind of shift some of that ranking there around. Then they had Notre Dame, Alabama, which was 6 and 11. Obviously, that didn't happen. You end up with Penn State being there at 6 and SMU at 11, getting that 11 spot over Alabama, which again, rightfully so. That's what I believe it should have been. Here's where your matchups take place, date and time and all. The first one that you're going to get is going to be 4 o'clock on the 21st here in just a couple of weeks. That's Clemson and Texas. Fun fact, didn't know this, Clemson and Texas never have played each other. Never would have thought that. Very interesting. But that's what you get in the first matchup. Texas opens at 11-point favorite in that one. Very interesting. Then you get the winner of that will play Arizona State the week before that, or the week after that at Chick-fil-A Bowl. Hosting that first game is Texas. Again, these are kind of fun in those first round games. You get those host games by the higher seed, which is Texas. Then you get Tennessee and Ohio State. That one's going to be prime time. Also on the 21st there at 8 o'clock, Ohio State's a 7.5-point favorite at home. Huge matchup there. All of these games pretty much that I'm looking at, they're going to be fun matchups. Pretty fun matchups, I think, coming into this. The winner of that game will move on to play Oregon. And then you get SMU and Penn State on the 21st as well. That one's at lunchtime, so that's technically your first kick. Penn State, a 9-point favorite. I still think this is going to be a really good football game. Penn State looked a lot better in this game than they have all season long, to me, against Oregon. So maybe they've got a little bit of life to show here getting in this playoff in this way. SMU didn't look all that great, but they showed up nearing the end of that football game to make it a game, to come back, obviously tie things up and push the potential of overtime. Part of me did look at it and go, man, I kind of feel like maybe you should go for 2 here and just get the win. Get the win right out of the bag. In the end, it probably wouldn't have mattered considering they didn't get that, because Clemson would have got it, and obviously they kicked the field goal to win, which if you go for 2 and you don't get it and Clemson gets it, it doesn't matter. Things change completely then. You're trying for an onside kick anyways. But nonetheless, I think that's still going to end up being a good game. The winner of that will end up going and playing Boise. Penn State is the home on that one. Then you get number 10, Indiana, at number 7, Notre Dame. Another good one. Notre Dame is 7.5-point favorite. That one happens the day before at prime time on 8 o'clock. That is December the 20th. So another good matchup, I think, there. Indiana hasn't really played anybody tough. Some of the tough games that they did play this season, they kind of got waxed in. I feel like Notre Dame, this might be the only game I look at on the schedule and go, Notre Dame might have ended up in a pretty good spot there, getting to pull Indiana to start. The winner of that is going to play Georgia in the All-State Sugar Bowl. So you've got some fun matchups there. So the next time we'll see Georgia on the field is going to be prime time, 8:45 on ESPN on the 1st. We get New Year's game, obviously, there. Georgia not hosting anything but fun. Some of the color schemes, I thought this is going to be kind of fun to look at, and then you're going to see things in weird places, which is very interesting. Clemson, Texas, the color scheme doesn't really matter to me there. They're both orange. One's burnt orange, one's slightly less burnt orange, but a lot of orange for sure happening in that football game. Tennessee, Ohio State, that's going to be kind of fun to see a Tennessee orange having to go and play in, what do they call it, the big house or the big shoe, whatever it is over there, I don't know. But playing in that game, that's going to be kind of interesting for that color matchup. But also the potential, this game is being played December 21st at 8 p.m. Probably going to be pretty cold. The only good thing for Tennessee, is Tennessee has played in this cold before, so they'll kind of understand that. So even if you get that snow game, I think Tennessee's a little bit more prepared than somebody, say, Miami or something like that. They probably would have a lot harder time playing up in the north, playing in one of those really cold games, just like if it was August and you have a team like Penn State having to travel to Arizona or something like that and play. That would probably be pretty tough on them. But I thought that one would be interesting. SMU, Penn State, another one. This is SMU having to travel from a long way off to Penn State. And potentially, again, it's going to be a lunchtime kick. But that would be a fun one to see, kind of a snow matchup there. And you talk about a home kind of game here. Indiana traveling over to South Bend. I mean, not much travel for that team there. So luckily, not going to be big of a deal there in some of those matchups as far as travel. But more or less just kind of getting to play in some of the colder spots. So that'll be something interesting to kind of look at again. Winner of Clemson, Texas will move on to the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl to play Arizona State. Winner of Tennessee, Ohio State will move on to play in the Rose Bowl against Oregon. The winner of SMU, Penn State will move on to play in the VRBO Fiesta Bowl against Boise State. And then obviously Indiana, Notre Dame moving on to play All-State, Sugar Bowl against Georgia. Very fun. Your final playoff picture and rankings line up like this. Oregon 1, Georgia 2, Texas 3, Penn State 4. That's your top 4, even though they don't line up that way with the 4 byes. Notre Dame 5, Ohio State 6, Tennessee 7, Indiana 8, Boise State 9, SMU 10, Alabama 11, Arizona State 12. Again, Alabama ranked in the top 11, not in the ranked in the top 12, not in the college football playoffs because, again, of the way it works. Like I said, you might not be in the top 25, the 12, a la Clemson, who's going to be in there. Not in the 12, but you're in the playoffs. And you might be in the 12 and not in the playoffs. Here's your perfect example right here in the first season of it. One other thing that I did kind of think was a little bit funnier earlier today that I was thinking about it. You know, when you said, hey, we're going to have the top 12 teams play for the college football playoff, you pretty much would have looked and said, okay, well, Alabama will never be left out. And in probably 10, 15, 20 years, there's going to be a trivia question. I'm not saying it's going to be on Jeopardy or anything, but there's going to be a trivia question that's out there, and it says, who was the team who had made the college football playoff the most, but somehow managed to miss the first ever 12-team playoff that nobody would have thought they'd ever miss by this format coming in? And the answer will be Alabama, because we know how that fan base is, and I just thought that was an interesting thing. But anyways, I kind of rounded out like this. Arizona State 12, Miami 13, right there on the edge, looking in at 10-2. Ole Miss 9-3, 14. South Carolina 15, Clemson 16, again getting in that way. BYU 17, Iowa State 18, Missouri 19, which is still crazy to me. Illinois 20, Syracuse 21. Army 22, Colorado 23, UNLV 24, and Memphis rounding it out at 25 on a 10-2 season. Very interesting there. All of your bowl games have already been created. I'm going to run through them really quickly, and then we'll kind of round out the show here because we're running a little bit longer than I usually would like to. December 14th in the Cricket Celebration Bowl, you get Jackson State and South Carolina. I'm actually going to look and just kind of see if I see some of the bigger ones on here that we'll kind of talk about instead of going through those big ones. Obviously, we got the college football playoff rankings in here. Tulane, Florida play in the Gasparilla Bowl on December 20th. Let's see some other fun ones that we would kind of care a little bit more about. Oklahoma versus Navy in the Armed Forces Bowl, December 27th. That's interesting. Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt. That should be an interesting one. The Birmingham Bowl on December 27th. Interested to see that anyway. Texas A&M and USC playing December 27th, in the Las Vegas Bowl. Louisiana and TCU. That's Louisiana Monroe, I would imagine. Iowa State and Miami in the Pop-Tarts Bowl on the 28th. BYU, Colorado in the Alamo Bowl on the 28th. Also, Marshall and the Army on the 28th in the Independence Bowl. Iowa and Missouri playing in the Music City Bowl on December 30th. Alabama versus Michigan. Hello, college football playoff rematch. December 31st. That one is the ReliaQuest Bowl. Okay. South Carolina, Illinois in the Cheez-It Bowl. Baylor and LSU in the Kinder's Texas Bowl. How about that? Tax Slayer Bowl is Duke and Ole Miss. And those are the big ones. A lot of matchups happening. Bowl season is set. Just like that, college football playoffs is set. Man, the crazy thing is, like I said, we still got like 4 more weeks of college football because of this college football playoff that's going to stretch into deep into January. Actually, I guess that final game is January 20th. Yeah. National championship is January 20th. The odd thing is kind of how this games line up, because it's like in the first round, like Friday and Saturday. The second round is like Wednesday, Thursday. The third round's like Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. And then obviously the final is on Monday, which it's always been, which I've always wished they'd kind of change up, at least when Georgia's in that, because Monday nights, man, that's late to be playing a college football playoff national championship game, which will be played at 7:30. So it'll be a late game, regardless of where you play in the country. But that's what we got, man. What a great game! What a great season! It's been tough at times. It's been rocky at times. It's been, man, what kind of team are we getting from week in and week out? But one thing's for sure, we got some dogs that like to fight, and I love to see that, and I'm excited about that. So I have one last little note that I did want to kind of run through here. I was listening to another show. I kind of listened to them on and off here and there, and I noticed one of these guys was coming out, and for whatever reason, he was giving a lot of credit out to Georgia's scheduling. And hey, Georgia, man, they play a tough schedule. The SEC, they should be ashamed of the fact that they've lined Georgia up in this way. And this week, listening back to this guy, I wondered, why did he all of a sudden change his tune a little bit when Kirby kind of called Greg Sankey and the SEC out after the SEC championship game? All the while, weeks before, this guy had been saying, hey, man, Georgia, SEC should be ashamed for giving Georgia this terrible and tough of a schedule. And then all of a sudden, Kirby calls him out for it, and he goes, man, why are we whining? Why are we fussing about having a tough schedule? Just go out there and play your games. And I'm thinking, why do you flip the script that easily on a team like that? But it is what it is. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. That's what we're here for. We just like to talk about things. Hey, glad to have you guys here, and I appreciate you guys being here yet again. Let's kind of reevaluate where things are. Might come to you guys on Sunday, obviously, to it could be earlier than that. I might do like an emergency pod just to talk about the potential of what they find out with Carson Beck here coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be something interesting to look forward to. I may come on again just to talk about some of the college football playoff madness that's on its way, because we only have a couple of weeks before we get to the point of at least that first round of playoffs, which is going to matter. Obviously, that's going to be the opponent that we're going to be playing. So we might kind of do some previewing of that, kind of catching up on some of what's going on around our team as well. Obviously, there's going to be some transfer news coming in. Hopefully no injury news, but we should at least get an injury update on Carson Beck here sometime soon. When some of this stuff starts to drop is going to be when I kind of kick back on and do that. Obviously, we got bowl games to be played, so we might try to keep this thing going here over the next couple of weeks before we get to that. But if you go through and you look and you say, hey, man, this guy hadn't come back on for another week, just know it's because, hey, Georgia's not playing for about 3 weeks. And that's what I want to cover. That's what I want to stay on top of is Georgia football. So if that happens, just understand that's all it is me just trying to keep up with what it is that's going on with Georgia, as opposed to just what it is that's going on in the world completely. So, again, I appreciate you guys being here and listening and watching. If you guys are on YouTube, again, hit that thumbs up. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate it. Otherwise, if you want to go find it on podcast and listen to it there, listen back, send it to a friend or what have you, I greatly appreciate it. If you want to support the show, I have a link in the description of the podcast. You can click it, and you can click that link to also support the show. I greatly appreciate that as well. If you want to leave any kind of feedback or just leave a voicemail, so to speak, it's not a phone number or anything like that, but there is a SpeakPipe link. When you click that Linktree link, it'll take you to everything: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, all the things, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. It'll give you the link that you can go to donate to the show if you guys would like to do that, and it will give you that SpeakPipe link where all you have to do is click it, click record, whether you're on your headphones, whether you're in your car, whether you're on your computer, it doesn't matter, and you can just say whatever you want to say, and it's going to send it directly to me in the show. I'll make sure to check that here over the next couple of weeks and get back to you guys on anything that you might put in there. Obviously, that could be played on the show at any point in time. But other than that, I greatly appreciate you guys being here, and I will be sure to check in with you guys here coming up in just a little while. Glad to see the Dogs on top of the SEC once again. Go Dogs.
How about them dogs? That's just how I